Social movements in Chile are preparing to commemorate 2 years since the outbreak of major social unrest and protests, which were heavily repressed by security forces. The Constitutional Court of Bolivia has ruled that Jeanine Áñez was acting unconstitutionally on assuming the post of president following the 2019 coup against Evo Morales. A large explosion tore through a mosque in the Afghan city of Kandahar during Friday prayers, causing heavy casualties. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Social movements in Chile have begun to mobilise as they commemorate 2 years since the outbreak of major social unrest and protests, which were heavily repressed by security forces. Diverse organisations have stressed that 2 years on, the demands that triggered the unrest in 2019 have yet to be met. They've also noted that the anniversary on October 18th is not an occasion for celebrations, but to renew the struggle for justice after the widespread state-sponsored abuses committed. Meanwhile, the Mapuche movement has noted that the date coincides with the militarisation of the southern regions of the country, where indigenous communities are reclaiming rights to their ancestral lands. The mobilisations also come as broad sectors of Chile call for the impeachment of President Sebastián Piñera in the wake of the Pandora Papers scandal. As Venezuela prepares for the regional elections in November, new attempts at destabilisation have been denounced. Our correspondent Andre Vieira has the story.
The national government denounced a new attack against the national electric system, triggering a service failure in large part of the capital region.
Ha ocurrido un nuevo ataque al sistema eléctrico nacional.
There has been a new attack on the national electric system at least 1 hour ago. There was a breakdown of lines 1 and 2 of Papelón Convento substation and in the capital district, which caused Convento and Nodal substations to lose power, which also affected the substations of Cotamil, Santa Rosa Chacao and Magallanes. The attack damaged 30% of the electric power supply in the capital. The possibility of it being a new attack in what has been named an electric war is not ruled out, to which Minister Reverol highlighted the swift response of the government to re-establish more than 90% of the power grid.
En este momento todo el país se encuentra el sistema eléctrico nacional estabilizado.
At this moment, the entire country is stabilized. There is no nationwide impact, but there will remain 15 to 10% while we manage to repair the conductors. All the necessary equipment and logistics is here to restore them immediately. This possible attack on the power system comes after Venezuela experienced last weekend an electoral drill in preparation for the mega elections in which governors, mayors, councilmen and state legislators will be elected, and 3 days before the 4th round of Venezuela peace talks in Mexico.
André Vieira y Jesús Romero, teleSUR, Caracas, Venezuela.
The United Nations has confirmed that it will send a panel of electoral experts to Venezuela for the November 21st regional elections. The UN Secretariat informed that after completing a technical evaluation process, it had responded positively to the request of the National Electoral Council of Venezuela and will deploy a team of 3 experts who will arrive in the country in November to carry out a follow-up on the process and provide the Secretary-General with an independent and internal report on the general development of the elections. The text clarified that electoral experts do not issue public statements on electoral processes or their results, but provide electoral assistance, as opposed to observation missions, which require a specific mandate from the Security Council or the General Assembly. The 15th meeting of the Russia-Venezuela High-Level Intergovernmental Commission concluded in Moscow on Friday with the signing of new cooperation agreements. The Venezuelan delegation, led by Minister of Industry and National Production Jorge Ariasa, held talks on a range of issues with the Russian group of representatives, led by Deputy Chairman of the Government of the Russian Federation, Yuri Borisov. Venezuela expressed its interest in increasing Russian investments in sectors such as farming, mining and energy. The delegation also highlighted the country's strong and effective legal framework for the protection of foreign investors, noting that the productive foreign investment law includes measures which protect investors from the United States' unilateral sanctions against Venezuela. Far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro authorized the entry and temporary stay of United States military forces for a joint training exercise with the Brazilian army. The contingent of US troops will consist of over 200 military personnel equipped with weapons, ammunition, optical devices and sensors among other equipment to carry out the exercises, according to the decree signed by the Brazilian president. The combined operations and rotation exercises will take place from November 28th to December 18th in southwestern Brazil. This is the second such exercise between the military forces of the two countries as part of an initiative signed in October 2020 with the Trump administration to increase interoperability between their armies. And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Bolivia, the Plurinational Constitutional Court has ruled that the assumption of Jeanine Áñez as president on November 12, 2019 was unconstitutional as there was no power vacuum following the ousting of President Evo Morales. The decision of the Constitutional Court was released through an official statement on Friday and ratifies that a coup against then President Evo Morales was indeed carried out. In this context, the Attorney General's office also finished a review process of the electoral acts of the 2019 presidential elections. Over 34,500 electoral acts were submitted for revision in a process that began on Monday. Following the analysis, Attorney General Wilfredo Chaves sentenced that it has been demonstrated that there was no electoral fraud. On November 7, 2019, extremist opposition sectors denounced, with no real evidence, alleged fraud, claims which were supported by the Organization of American States and used to justify the coup and destabilizing acts in the country. As COVID-19 cases fall and with more than 50% of the population vaccinated in Argentina, people are flocking to local tourist destinations. During a long weekend, more than 1.6 million people travelled for vacations, with national tourists spending almost 3 times more than the same weekend 2 years ago before the pandemic began. Part of the cost was subsidised by government programmes, which gave credits for tourists to spend in their destinations as a means to boost the industry heavily impacted by the pandemic. Travellers are encouraged by a reduced number of COVID-19 cases, which now stand at around 1,000 daily reported cases after they peaked at 33,000 during March. Fewer COVID-19 related deaths have also been reported.
The pandemic affected us a lot, the business, the tourism, the population in general, but we were working on the comeback. We were rearming ourselves. Again, we were resistant again. Again, we managed to move forward. We are a resilient people. We are like the phoenix bird. We turn things around. We rise from the ashes.
The truth is that the post-pandemic tourism has surprised us for the better because we are working better. In almost 40 years that I have been in the business, we have never worked as much as we do now. But why? Because people do not go abroad. International tourism is still unlikely, and people who used to go to other destinations are now touring Argentina.
Nicaraguan health authorities will begin vaccinating children against COVID-19 using Cuban-made vaccines next week. Vice President Rosario Murillo announced that the vaccination campaign will benefit children from 2 years of age up who will receive the Cuban vaccines Abdala and Soberana 02. Vaccination is voluntary. The announcement comes as a first batch of 1.2 million doses is due to arrive in the Central American nation from Cuba. A second batch of 2 million doses of Soberana 02 and 1 million of Abdala will arrive in November. The Italian government introduced on Friday its COVID-19 passport mandatory for all workers in the country. The measure requires workers to show proof of vaccination, a negative rapid swab test or recent recovery from COVID-19 before returning to workplaces. The measure stipulates the suspension of salary payments for those workers who refuse to comply with the regulation, in addition to a fine of €1,500. Employers who let workers continue to work without the document will be fined from €600 to €1,000. While opponents tried to mount major protests on Friday, most Italians appeared to accept the rule as necessary. The The Chinese government urged the United States to change its human rights policy regarding other countries after rejoining the United Nations Human Rights Council.
Over 3 years ago, the United States announced its high-profile withdrawal from the UN Human Rights Council, which is still fresh in our memory. We hope that the US will take its re-election as a member of the Human Rights Council as an opportunity to practice multilateralism with concrete actions, engage in constructive dialogue and cooperation with other parties, and play a positive role in advancing the work of the Human Rights Council. Right after the re-election, the US once again pointed the finger at other countries over their human rights situation. It is time for the US to get rid of this stubborn, distasteful hobby. If the US continues to apply double standards, politicize the human rights issue, and attack and oppress other countries after the re-election, it will surely face backlashes. The best option for the US is to immediately remedy its severe violations of human rights at home and abroad.
The UN Biodiversity Conference held in the Chinese city of Kunming closed on an upbeat note after a week that brought a joint commitment and pledges of funding to help countries put words into action. The Executive Secretary of the UN Convention said the country's joint declaration at the conference and the strong political direction provided by many ministers had put global efforts on track. Standout moments during the meeting were a pledge by the 195 participating countries to reverse the loss of animal and plant species by 2030 and a donation of more than $200 million by China to an established biodiversity fund. The COP15 summit and the COP26 summit, which will take place in the Scottish city of Glasgow next month, are crucial meetings on the environment being held this year. Now we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. A large explosion tore through a Shia mosque in the southern Afghan city of Kandahar during Friday prayers, causing heavy casualties. The cause of the explosion was not immediately clear, but it came a week after a suicide attack on Shiite worshippers at a mosque in the northern city of Kunduz that was claimed by ISIS. Medical sources and a provincial official confirmed a toll of over 50 people and around 90 injured, and at least 15 ambulances were rushing to and from the scene. Taliban special forces have secured the site and have asked people to donate blood to help the victims.
I worked inside the mosque. It was the Friday prayer time and we were preparing for our prayers. We heard the sound of shots. 2 people had entered the mosque. They opened fire on the guards and in response, the guards also opened fire on them. One of them committed a suicide blast inside the mosque. Following him, the other also committed suicide blast. It was the time of Friday prayers. One suicide bomber came and stood by the door. One of them had come earlier and was inside the mosque already. He wanted the other one to enter too, but our armed forces shot him. Both the men blew themselves up in the mosque.
There are fears of an escalation of the humanitarian crisis in the northern Ethiopian region of Tigray, as the Ethiopian government has launched what it described as a final offensive against the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Reports said this week that coordinated attacks by the government forces and its allies took place in the Amhara and Afar regions close to Tigray's southern border. The ground operations are being backed by drones and airstrikes. The conflict, which broke out in November 2020, has displaced millions of people and forced hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans into famine, a situation the United Nations has blamed on a government blockade. Around 5.2 million people in Tigray and another 1.7 million people in Afar and Amhara are dependent on food aid. 11 students drowned and 2 more are in a critical condition after a tracking accident in Indonesia. Some 150 members of an Islamic Scouts group aged from 13 to 15 years old were walking along a riverbank when 21 are thought to have attempted to cross the water. The students were reported to have been trekking in the area and cleaning the riverbank despite official warnings from the National Disaster Mitigation Agency. River trekking is banned for children and teenagers during the rainy season, which starts in late November. In February last year, 10 scouts died after they were swept away by a flash flood that also left nearly 24 injured. In the United States, indigenous groups and other environmental activists marched to the Capitol on Friday as they continued a week-long protest demanding that Congress and the Biden administration stop new fossil fuel projects and act with greater urgency to address climate change. Nearly 80 people were arrested on the fifth day of the People versus Fossil Fuels protest, bringing the total arrested during the week to more than 600. Activists pressed President Joe Biden to stop approving new pipelines and other fossil fuel projects and declare a climate emergency. Organisers said that the protest is part of a historic surge of Indigenous resistance in the nation's capital that started on Monday, Indigenous Peoples Day, outside the White House.
Ridiculous. You know, he promised, just like they've done in the past. Promise this, we'll talk about it, we'll bring it to the table. But where's our seat? We haven't had a seat. We haven't been heard. We haven't been listened. It takes youth to be on the front lines. It takes us to put our bodies on the line. The trauma, everything. And yet we're still being overlooked like we're nothing. Well, check this out, world. We are the generation that says enough is enough and we'll be heard. We will have a seat at the table.
Experts have described the latest volcanic activity on the Spanish island of La Palma as a tsunami of lava. Huge rivers of molten rock have been spewing from the crater in recent days after a 4.5 magnitude earthquake shook the island on Thursday and intensified the lava flows. The quake was the strongest recorded since the Cumbre Vieja volcano began erupting almost a month ago. Lava rolling toward the Atlantic Ocean forced the evacuation of more than 300 people late on Thursday, bringing the number of people forced from their homes since Tuesday to over 1,000, according to the La Palma government. Authorities have not reported any casualties from the eruption on the island of some 85,000 people. As the international community prepares to celebrate World Food Day, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the agency further from achieving the goal of ending world hunger by 2030. FAO Director General Ku Dong-yu said the UN agency must double its efforts to find ways to help the world produce enough food, while climate change and conflict make the task even harder. Saturday will see the 40th World Food Day, an annual event intended to raise awareness about the 3 billion people in the world who cannot afford a healthy diet.
This year's World Food Day found us at a critical moment. The COVID-19 pandemic remains a global challenge causing untold losses and hardship. The impacts of the climate crisis are all around us. The lives and livelihoods of millions of people have been thrown into turmoil, with a widespread suffering due to the many natural disasters and humanitarian emergencies. Global food insecurity has not been this severe for years.
During the height of the COVID crisis, when borders were closed, it was the local producers who ensured that their communities and their neighborhoods had sufficient supply of food. As we follow up on the Food Systems Summit, we need a broad-based partnership that ensure that small-scale farmers are fairly rewarded for their labor. Major priorities are pricing systems that reflect the full and the true cost of production, and also by deploying more finance to neglected and vulnerable rural communities.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Jeanine Áñez. Thank you for watching.